All right, well, good evening, everybody. Appreciate those of you coming in this evening. It's chilly out there, so welcome. Welcome to our regularly scheduled Zoning Advisory Commission meeting for January 5th. It's now 2022. Call this meeting to order. Travis, would you please take roll?
Russell?
Here.
Zakaro?
Here.
Luffelholtz? Norton? Here. Mulligan?
Here.
And Kemp? And Christ?
Here.
All right, very good. Travis, can you confirm we're in compliance with the Iowa Open Meetings Law?
We are.
Thank you. So for everybody's information, Brittany Leffelholtz is joining us on Zoom this evening, so you'll hear her coming through. So in front of you, commissioners, this evening, we've got our meeting minutes from our last meeting on December 1st. And so at this point, I'd entertain any modifications or a motion for approval.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the minutes as submitted. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Travis, if you would take roll.
Zakaro?
Aye.
Russell?
Aye.
Christ?
Aye.
Norton?
Abstain.
Luffelholtz? Kemp is absent. Mulligan?
Aye. All right, very good. If you're in the room and you don't have an agenda, I believe there's one in the back. Is that right? Okay. So on our agenda here, the first item is an action item. We've got 5 items this evening. Our first one is a site plan waiver for 1080 12th Street. How this will work is if the applicant could come forward and state what it is that they are after from the commission, that would be great.
I do enjoy this podium. Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Peter Arling. I'm an attorney with O'Connor and Thomas PC here in Dubuque. And reminds me, I heard a phone go off, make sure mine's off. I represent 12th Street REHC LLC and Tucker Freight Lines, Inc. 12th Street REHC LLC is the applicant this evening. I have with me Mr. Jordan Pape. Jordan is the Director of Purchasing and Properties for Tucker Freight Lines, Inc., and he has been instrumental in working with Mr. Schrobelgen on tonight's application. I appreciate your time this evening, and hopefully when you read the application on its own, it looks more convoluted than it actually is. So to the extent you have the packet in front of you, I would ask you to actually turn to the very last page, assuming they're in the same order that mine was. And it shows 2 aerial views. To me, this helps clarify the issues before we get into the actual sub-issues. The 2009 aerial photo versus the 2020 aerial photo. Tucker Freight Lines, Inc. formerly was known as Art Pape Transfer, Inc., a local trucking firm that's been around for several generations. It's currently owned by Sonia and Andrew J. Tucker. They bought it in 2018 and have been growing the business significantly. As you can see from the aerial photo, the photo on the left of that last page shows a black roof. That is the corporate headquarters for Tucker Freight Lines, Inc. You can see all the other parking area, and that truly is the parking area. Further to the east, or if you're holding it 8.5 by 11 with the 11 upright, it would be up on the paper. But it's to the east of, or away from the parcel we're here to talk about. They also own a building adjacent there that does a lot of their maintenance and other activity. What we're here today about is the parcel that's been identified with the red outline. Again, I'm looking at it lengthwise or longwise on the far left, the red outline property. When the Tuckers purchased this company, the property as it sat was sufficient. Again, they've grown the company considerably. And what this parcel is for, what they acquired it for from the Department of Transportation, what they acquired it for was storing those trailers that were not being used on a daily basis. So there's some things I'm going to point out in the application and some of the city comments. It sounds like the city was looking at this as a parking lot. This is for a storage lot for predominantly the trailers. That's important because we understand that as a storage lot for trailers that are not being used, and we understand the city looks at if it's going to be resting for 48 hours or more, that's more storage as opposed to parking, then those trailers can be stored on a non-paved surface. So again, what we're here today to talk about is this area that will be for storage. And you can see in the aerial picture, there are some trailers stored on there currently. The property is zoned heavy industrial. It's able to be used incident to Tucker Freight Lines, Inc. Everything is fine until we get down to some of these unique requirements if Tucker Freight Lines is going to utilize that parcel for storage. Now, one of which deals with paved access. If you keep your hand on that, well, I guess if you look at that picture, Tucker Freight Lines and 12th Street REHC is not using any access point to either 11th Street or 12th Street, or to the frontage road for that matter, from this parcel. And that's really what that requirement looks at. Based on my reading of the ordinance, if we're dealing with paved access, that would be off a frontage road or a primary road. They're going to access this storage area going through their existing property. So for one of the things we're asking for, the existing lot for Tucker Freight Lines and has been a blend of asphalt and compacted milled asphalt for a long time. That's what the existing lot is. That's what we are proposing for this new parcel to store on. So they're not proposing a gravel base. They're actually proposing using recycled, well, there will be heavy rock base, and the plans are on the second page of the packet is what MSA put together for Tucker Freight Lines for purposes of presenting to the city. There will be, as you can see, the 12-inch base of breaker run, 4 inches of crushed aggregate base course, and then 2 inches of asphalt millings. And then that will be compacted consistent with their existing lot. If you look at that picture on the last page, you can see their existing lot. They maintain their existing lot, and this lot has held up and is holding up quite well to the traffic that they have. And keep in mind, the existing lot is parking and trucks coming and going all the time. This storage area is for those trailers predominantly that aren't going to be used for 3 days, 4 days, et cetera. As an example, the trailers that are sitting there now, depending on which trailer you're dealing with, have been there from 6 to 14 days. So these are truly trailers that are being stored when they're not being utilized. As a trucking company, you hope to store fewer trailers than not store them. You don't want them sitting for long, but this is what that area is for. So again, in regards to the request for the waiver on the paved access, to require a paved access, and we understand from city planning that they may not look at this compacted milled asphalt consistently with like a concrete or a paver block or a permeable solid construction type drive. But if Tucker Freight Lines were going to be required to put in a quote unquote paved access from their adjacent property to this property, it just doesn't make sense. This is such a unique situation. We're not looking to add access from the streets. Everything will be off of 12th Street and 11th Street as it currently enters the property closer to the corporate headquarters building. So our position is that given the unique characteristics of this property and the impractical nature of requiring a paved access from their current parking area to the proposed storage area, we would ask this commission to waive that requirement. Same thing on gated access. Now, gated access and screening are kind of part and parcel together, but I'll take them separately. The ordinance requires a gated access to go over that access point. If we were dealing with a new property or an adjacent property that had an access other than through the existing parking area, it would make sense. But if you look at the aerial on that last page, when you're going to be accessing from up by where the corporate headquarters is and through that parking lot to the storage area, it doesn't make sense to require a gate to block off part of that parking lot just to get into the storage area. So again, technically, under the code, it would require it, but based on the impractical nature and the fact that this is such a unique situation, such a unique property, we're asking that this commission also waive that gate requirement. Now, that brings us to the screening issue, or screening or fencing. When Mr. and Mrs. Tucker purchased this property, July 2nd, 2018, and I don't know how many of you have been past that, I'm sure all of you have been past it at one point or another, there used to be a rather unsightly chain link fence and other items that blocked access to the street along the entire 11th Street side and portions of 12th Street. Well, it got back to Mr. and Mrs. Tucker that the city thought that was ugly. They tore out the fence, they put in weed mat control, and they put in large breaker rock to make it look consistent with the levee that's directly across the street. They went with that same limestone design so they could have a space between the street and their property, not have the ugly chain link fence that we understood the city didn't like, but still have some sort of a barrier, if you will, between the public right-of-way and where they're going to park their trucks and their tractors, or their trailers and tractors. In this regards, we're asking for a waiver of the screening and fencing requirement, even though it's storage, and storage would require screening or fencing, because in large part, if you look at the ordinance, and when you're talking about the screening requirement, it seems to deal with items other than semi-trailers. It says screening for exterior storage is intended to buffer surrounding property from the negative visual impact created by the storage of raw or finished goods. That doesn't apply. Materials, again, that doesn't apply. And then it says, and equipment.
It's equipment.
Arguably, are trailers equipment? Sure, they're equipment. I don't believe that's the spirit of the ordinance, though. The way I see that is more smaller equipment, more heavier equipment, maybe tractors, tractor attachments, stuff like that. Maybe not. But in this case, you have the property to the east where you have trailers and tractors, and you're going to have the natural flow of the trailers onto this property. Visually, it's going to be the same as the property as it exists today, directly adjacent. We believe that the screening or fencing requirement would be inconsistent with what the ordinance is actually calling for. I mean, we understand trying to buffer. If you think about if it's going to adversely impact the value of adjacent property, this is heavy industrial. Across the street is the City of Dubuque's Jewel facility. Further east are other parcels that I would argue are not as attractive as the Tucker Freight Lines property. They're not unattractive, they're just, they're industrial properties. You have the solar farm directly to the north, but even that doesn't have buffering or screening. It has what looks like a security fence that you can clearly see through, and these pictures are in the packet. The only people that really see this facility, other than people driving by in a heavy industrial area, and they see the loading and the grain terminals and the salt terminals across the street, the only people who would otherwise see this, even if there were screening, would be the people on the highway. The highway has a natural berm on its own, which effectively cuts off this property from the bulk of the Millwork District downtown. So again, given the unique situation that this property is, its location, the adjacent use of the property and the lack of any screening in that, to allow Tucker Freight Lines, Inc. a consistent corporate image throughout its entire parcel, we believe that it would be wholly appropriate for this commission to waive the screening and fencing requirements. Now finally, I want to talk briefly about landscaping. As I'm sure you're all aware, and I know you've all read the packets, this parcel is located adjacent to a parcel that is a brownfield and has some significant environmental concerns. It's the Jewel property. I've talked with Ms. Diane Engelman from the EPA. Tucker Freight Lines has worked with the EPA. One of the things we don't want to do is anything on the property that could jeopardize what is currently contained underground on the Jewel property. We have a much better understanding of what's going on, and there are monitoring wells on this property, which we'll talk about in a minute. But there are things underground that, as long as they stay in place underground, they're fine. When we research what could or couldn't be done, if you look at that second page, and you see those monitoring wells, we were alerted to the fact that any alteration of those monitoring wells raises the potential of having either more water or something else get down to the contaminant layer. I'm not going to claim to be an engineering expert. I'm not going to claim to be an environmental expert. But I do understand basic ideas on that. How it was explained to me is, if you look at that monitoring well, it's like a big straw that goes underground, and it takes it right down to the contaminant level. Now, there is no contamination on this property. The contamination is over on the Jewel property. But they have these monitoring wells to make sure that that contaminant is not moving. Initially, Tucker Freight Lines and 12th Street REHC was looking at potentially taking those monitoring wells from roughly about 3 feet above ground down to ground level, similar to what the city did for the Jewel facility. I don't know how that worked, but they took it where they dropped it and probably put some sort of a vault that would trap it. The concern from the EPA was, you might be able to do that. We would prefer you not. We would prefer to have them up above. Number one, they're less likely, if you're plowing, to have somebody tear off a top where suddenly you have a deluge of water go down to that contaminant layer. Or if you had a fuel spill, fuel is a solvent, if that went down to the contaminant layer, the concern was we would prefer you not move those monitoring wells. Tucker Freight Lines took note and said, that makes sense. You know, we want to be a good neighbor, we want to be a good corporate citizen. So they're leaving those monitoring wells at that roughly 3-foot high area. What that does, if you look at the layout, and I know they're a little hard to see, especially when I don't have my glasses on. If you look on the south end, there are monitoring wells to the bottom right quadrant, to the probably a third of the way up towards the left side, and then there are some monitoring wells outside of the area that Tucker Freight Lines is proposing to put this aggregate base with the compacted millings to make an asphalt type surface. They left those wells outside of where they're going to park the truck trailers for the storage purposes. There are other parts of the property that they've decided, hey, we're going to hold that off as well, so they have other areas that they can push snow, et cetera. Because of those locations of the monitoring wells, it does make the property less usable for storage. When you're dealing with a long trailer, if you're going to store it over there, a long trailer, you need a big area. So what we're asking, consistent with their current operation on their existing facility, is also not to require the landscaping, which would potentially further impact their ability to put the paving where they want, or the milled asphalt. Now, if they had landscaping in those open areas, they'd be more amenable to that. But at the end of the day, this is the only property that they have that they can utilize for those storage purposes. So the more is taken away. They are going to have it be similar to their current layout. They will put the limestone border around it. They would like to make it a very consistent corporate look to what they have. If you haven't seen it, the pictures do it some justice, but it is, again, people say, well, it's trucks. Well, it's not just trucks. It's a business. It's a family of employees, and they've tried to improve the visual impact. Not that it was ever ugly, but they've come in with new ideas, new focus, and they've brought it around to what is a nice area down there. They've listened to the city in removing the fence, and we believe that these minor waivers that we're requesting don't change significantly the property and will not impact any of the surrounding properties. I'm available for questions if anyone has any questions. If I can't field them, Jordan might be able to answer them, but in short, we're asking that this commission waive the paved access requirement. waive the gate requirement, the screening and fencing requirement, and the landscaping requirement, so that Tucker can utilize this property for storage and make it look consistent with the remaining part of its corporate campus.
Okay. Very good. I appreciate that. If you'd hold on just a minute.
Sure.
Commissioners, that was a lot. If you take a second, engage any questions that you might have for the applicant. I know I've got some notes here.
Sure.
I guess I have one, is we have pictures of the Jewel facility, the Alliant facility, and the storage lot, but we don't have any pictures showing the corporate, what you're wanting us to say is okay, what they have around the corporate. There's no corporate photos.
So if you look at,
I'm not seeing any, I've been through them several times, and I don't see any that show the corporate headquarters building and what the outside facility of that looks like. And you're saying it's going to be consistent with,
So
but
it-
I don't.
Pile of dirt here.
Yep, if you look at page 12, and I apologize, this isn't a great picture. These were submitted, I believe, maybe the city took some of these pictures as well.
The city did take some pictures. We're actually pulling up probably Google Maps, and then we have pictometry and our GIS we can pull up to
Perfect. So
refer to that so you can kind of see.
if you look at page 12, and this is before we get the other picture up, you can see the white van trailers, and mine are not numbered, I just counted to the 12th page, sorry. You can see adjacent to the white trailers, there's a bar of limestone rock. I'm looking at the one that says Tucker Trucking Site Photos.
Okay.
Top picture is view of site looking northeast from across 11th Street.
Yeah, it's,
So that's 12th Street. Nope, that's all right. That actually showed a decent image of the side of the building. So this would be on 11th Street. And so you can see the limestone here. If you see where this limestone is, can you see the picture? Everyone, used to be kind of I don't want to say run down, but an older chain link fence. It was not an attractive fence. And one of the requests that was made was, it's unsightly. So they pulled it, and so there we go. There's an older picture of the chain link fence with the barbed wire. Kind of had that less than inviting appeal to it. So again, they removed all of that. And when you're down by the flood wall, why wouldn't you go with limestone? I mean, I think the flood wall is quite attractive. It's a neat monument in our city. And so they've put a wide band of limestone going around the property. Underneath that limestone, they have weed mat and whatnot, and to prevent weeds from coming up through. And they maintain it, so anyone who's ever owned a house and utilized weed mat realizes it's not the end-all, be-all always. So they maintain the property that way. This is part of, so this would be right to the right of the white trailer is where one of the primary accesses is, off of 11th Street or Kerper Boulevard. And again, we're not asking, and they're not going to put any more access points on that adjacent parcel. That was never the plan. That's not going to be the plan. We're not asking for anything, and that's why the paved access doesn't make sense. In this situation, that's what we're talking about, having that band go around, consistent. I mean, you see off to the right side, you have the Gavilon elevator, or is that Gavilon or no, Cargill? There you go. There's the limestone block. I mean, again, when you're born and raised in the bluff country of Dubuque and you see limestone, to me, that's a great accent. But they wanted that consistency.
okay.
So does that help?
Commissioner
what you're-
Chris, does that-
Yeah, I just wondered why there weren't any included in our thing, that you're talking about what's around it,
Yep.
and we didn't have any pictures to see
Gotcha.
what was.
I apologize for that oversight.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions, commissioners? I do have a few. So I concur regarding the gated entry. So I do understand you expect to continue to carry the same entry point and work from east to west. I don't understand the request to deviate from the landscaping request, especially knowing the minimal amount that's requested here.
Sure.
I mean, it's been cut down to shrubs in this case, if I'm reading this correctly, Travis, which I think I am.
So I didn't realize that if that recommendation, the shrubs are okay. The question becomes, can they be placed in, a design where you make almost like an attractive vegetation thing in one of the open areas?
I would suspect that the ability to, I mean, we're talking total of 28 shrubs here, so I would suspect that's a pretty minimal request on behalf of the UDC to get past this.
Yep, I apologize. I didn't realize if it's the 28 shrubs, that's less of an issue. And I got derailed earlier. Our concern was with the trees. And if you
Agreed.
send a taproot down, we don't want to do anything that jeopardizes the city's lot next door by getting, and again, I'm not a scientific expert, but there was concerns about depending on what type of tree you put in, I don't want to put something down to that contaminant layer.
Okay, yeah, I think we all concur.
Okay.
That's a wise decision. I think I don't have any more questions right now, unless the commission does.
They would be, Tucker and 12th Street REHC would be fine putting in the 28 shrubs.
Okay.
If the trees are off the table, then we have less of a concern. Shrubs have such a shallow root base that we don't think that's going to be an issue.
Okay, so from that perspective, then I would argue the fence is not going to be 6 feet down, and so we need to talk about that because the desired state is to have a screened fence, right? And
So on the fence issue, it's more the continuity of the corporate campus.
agreed.
Yeah, and to put a fence up on just the end lot doesn't make sense.
You're right.
And that's why, I agree, the fence was never an issue of it being too deep in the ground or anything like that.
Okay. Okay. Anything else? Okay.
For staff.
Okay. We're good. We're going to move into the staff report, okay?
If
So you
there's
can have a
anything
seat.
else you need, we'll be
Of
here,
course.
so,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
Assistant Planner Travis Schrobelgen. So the UDC specifically allows the Zoning Advisory Commission to grant a waiver from site design standards as may be reasonable and within the general purpose and intent of the site review and approval provisions of Chapter 13. If literal enforcement of one or more of those provisions of the article is impractical or will exact an undue hardship because of the peculiar conditions pertaining to the land in question. Tucker's plans are to use the property as proposed as a storage for semi-trailers. As it represents a development of a vacant property, current UDC standards are applicable. The existing lot is vacant, but has some limitations regarding soil contamination. Development may require additional review by the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. Please see the environmental covenant handout. No, Brittany is not here with us, so just in summary, it basically states that there's a limit of 6 feet. Anything beyond that requires contact with the EPA, and it would probably behoove the applicants to contact the EPA with whatever their submittal is. Sorry about that. So the proposal may be able to be reconfigured or to partially or fully meet the current UDC standards. They are requesting a waiver from the hard surface as described. So generally, the vehicle access areas would require, not necessarily everything that's being outlined here, just yes there. So that rectangle is essentially what we're discussing here. That would require hard surfacing. The aggregate and asphalt millings do not meet city code. So that is one ask. Additionally, the trees and shrubs, as has been brought up, they would require 9 trees and 14 shrubs. Excuse me. And staff does recommend that in lieu of the 9 trees, 1.5 or 2 or whatever the commission describes be substituted as shrubs, or 1.5 or 2 shrubs per tree, sorry about that. It's for a total of at least 28 shrubs on the entire site, and that's just on the newest portion here. Exterior storage does require screening. Screening can be fences or hedges, shrubs, and evergreen trees, 50% after 3 years, or berms and graded slopes, which was an original submission, which the applicants backed away from. Sorry about that. Little dry mouth here. So both the Alliant Energy Solar Field and the Joule Operation and Training Center sites are examples of code-compliant solutions. To the north is the Alliant Energy Solar Field, and they have fencing. And then to the south is the Joule Training Center, where they have parking lots. That's a slightly different situation. However, landscaping is in that location. Additionally, a trail system has been installed around Alliant Energy, so people would see this more than just passersby on the highway or the on and off ramps. In addition, the city is exploring options for future expansion of that trail system, heading to the Millwork District and then to Pine Street Extension to 7th Street. And although this existing Tucker Trucking site has been unimproved with respect to landscaping for quite some time, the commission may wish to consider how this condition, if expanded, may or may not be harmonious with the other properties in the area and future development. The commission may establish any conditions, reasonable conditions, to ensure the general purpose and intent of the provisions are followed, and they may grant, deny, or approve portions of the site plan waiver request. Please note that affirmative vote of at least 4 commissioners is required to grant a waiver, and the project will be still subject to the city's development review process and will have to comply with all other city applicable codes. Planning staff recommends the Zoning Advisory Commission review the attached information provided by Tucker Trucking and the standards outlined to determine whether a waiver is appropriate. And the only other comment that I might bring up is the previously having a fence there. I have no knowledge of that being taken down or why that was taken down. So that's all I have, unless you have questions.
Yeah, I got a question.
So can I add to Mr. Stroblin's staff report, just to address some of the comments? So the question gets brought up a lot. Why do they have to do the improvements on this chunk of the property, but all their other remaining portion will still remain unfenced, unimproved in certain situations? There is a little bit of a current loophole in our ordinance, unfortunately. When we look at redevelopment of the site, and that requires a site plan for improved real estate, including partial clearance of 25% or more of the building area, or expansion of 25% or more of the building area. So in this case, they're not expanding the building, they're expanding the site. If they were to build an addition around their existing structure, their entire site would need to be brought up to current standards. And typically, we would have someone come through us with an existing site waiver that may reduce certain conditions, that may, for example, eliminate parking due to changes in code requirements with the landscape buffer yards and other things. So those are the typical requests that we see when we get a site plan waiver. Hence the reason why when we look at just this portion and the requirements being placed on here, it's because a site plan is required. We cannot extend those requirements to the adjoining property because they're not expanding the building. This is a new site for an expansion of the facility, and that's why we're just talking about this location. We have the code requirements that are put in place, and the intention isn't to waive requirements. They go through the board here. They have to have peculiar situation. They have to have, it can't be a financial situation. There has to be a reason for it. The other thing that gets brought into play when we look at site plan waivers specifically is, like I mentioned before, site constrictions and everything. So this is a vacant site that was purchased for an expansion. So because of that, we look at, okay, can they meet the current code requirements? And the answer to that question would be yes. It's the charge of the applicant to come before to explain to you why they can't meet those requirements for the site plan waiver. Based on the information that's provided and we listed in our application, like Mr. Schroven has indicated, when we talk about the paved access area, we're talking about the vehicle area. like your drive aisles, your areas where vehicles are going to be driving, because we do have concerns about, one, dust being created from gravel being pulled out in the street, mud gets pulled out in the street, aggregate pulls in the street. It's a concern for bicyclists, motorists, and some other ones. The city also has planned proposal for a bike hike trail system to go through this area, and then some other improvements for that. So one question was brought up about the monitoring wells. The city did, took the monitoring wells and reduced them down to grade. We did work with the engineering department worked with the EPA to put those in a manhole structure to protect those concerns that we have, specifically in certain situations like this. As you can see, some of them are exposed, how those can be protected. But as Mr. Shrobens indicated, we will be going through a site plan process still after this. This is just the first step, looking at, is there portions to waive? So you can waive everything, you can waive just portions of things if you feel necessary, or you have the decision not to waive anything. So, that's kind of the charge before you that has the ability for you to review. The fence around the solar field was not required. That's not required for screening because there's no storage there. That was for security purposes, the reason why they were putting that up. And also across the roadway here, you see the Jewel facility. There is no screening that's except for the parking lot landscaping where the shrubs are put in for the landscape buffer yards and the paved area for that. But you see that traffic circulation area is paved. So that's kind of the charge before you guys for you to review and make a determination on whether or not, due to if the peculiar conditions or other items have been identified before you, if you feel that's necessary to waive those requirements. So.
Great.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Wally. Okay, any questions for the staff?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions.
Yep.
It seems like when the fence around the existing site was removed, and then just putting back the limestone with the weed barrier and all that good stuff, was that a violation of UDC? Because it was it a required fence to begin with? Because now it seems like, there's nothing really keeping trucks or whatever from backing out onto the adjacent streets.
So we spoke with the engineering department. There was previous meetings with Tucker a long time ago before this property was even being purchased. There was different discussions that were going on. And in order to be approved to put the limestone rock in the right of way, because we have concerns, we have curb and gutter. We also look at trying to be more of a walkable neighborhood in our community with the sidewalk requirements. So as we look forward with the different site plans, a sidewalk may be required on the portion that they're looking at making improvements on. So, we look at the connectivity and the flow through that. So ideally, typically we do not have limestone rock placed into the area. I understand why they probably chose to do so. Like they mentioned, when you look around the area, there is limestone rock that's put on the flood wall system in order to help secure that. But then again, we don't want anything growing or penetrating in that flood wall system to cause issues with the safety and the structural stability of the facility. The one thing we did look at, as you noticed in the site plan, we talked about trees. Trees do have tap roots. Trees do go down in the ground, and that is concerned. And we help identify that is a legitimate concern on the site. We did have information from the EPA that basically says, anything basically 6 feet or deeper, they would want to review and take a look at and have concerns with. The other thing is, there was discussions at one time about maybe trying to berm the site, maybe use some of the existing soil on the site to build some berms. I know they've had some discussions with the EPA about that because, once again, they want to remove soil from the site for that. So there are multiple options out there that are available for them to try to look at for some of the screening requirements. There could be an opportunity for a compromise maybe for both, or there's the ability to waive everything or require everything. So basically, when I spoke with the engineering department, they don't technically have approval for all that rock to be in between the curb and the property line.
That's fine, but the fact that they removed the fence and now they're claiming that we shouldn't have to put up a fence because there isn't one there. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
When they removed that fence, was that a violation of the zoning code? Because they were required under previous site plans to have that fence.
Right, and understand this is an older portion of our community.
Yep.
And like they're describing, and it's very true, when you go down along here, it looks totally different, right? because it was developed at a different time. And the reason why we have new unified development codes is as properties are improved and improvements are made, we're bringing them into current code requirements. So that removal of the fence, I'd have to go back and take a look, specifically see what the requirement is for the site plan that was reviewed and approved at the time, whether or not the fence was required previously for that. A lot of times when we have these facilities, they like to use the fences for security. And as you notice, that fence wasn't really for screening. It was more for a security type purpose because it was a chain link fence. There was no landscaping, there was no trees, there was no anything. It was more of just a barrier for security reasons, in my opinion. But we'd have to go back and view. But once again, when we look at the existing site, those are the current requirements that we have. So,
Thank you, Wally.
Okay.
does that answer your question?
You know, I'd like to propose a thought to the commission. Pat, I'm sorry, did you have something?
No, I've got questions on other topics, but I don't know, do we want to do these one at a time, or is that what you're getting at?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
So I do think that the waiving of the gated entry would make a lot of sense based upon the way in which the site is currently laid out. The access is to come from the east, and I would propose that the waiver would be under the guise in which there would be no additional entry points off of, I think that's 11th and 12th, is that right?
Yes.
So having mandating a gated entry doesn't make any sense. They're not coming in off of that site anyways. So that seems to make a lot of sense, again, under the guise that it's going to have to go through a site plan review anyways, correct?
It does.
So that seems to make a lot of sense. I think the landscaping, as the applicant suggested, that's acceptable to move on to the shrubs, away from the trees. We're in good shape there. The paved access area, we have that now on their current site. And so carrying that through to well, we do on the drive aisles.
We do, but it's with screening and whatever else. That was going to be my next question.
Well, right, go back to leave the screening alone for a minute. But the paved access area, we would, it's still per code, you'd have a paved access area, which is the rectangular area highlighted by Travis earlier, and the balance would be gravel, correct? I think that needs to remain as is. And I would also, I understand that the screening is problematic. It's going to be, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do the back end of the property, but I think it needs to be done based on what that property is and what it's adjacent to, and what the intent of the city is in that area. I agree that from the highway, yes, you're going to see over whatever fence you put there. Mm-hmm. That's not the intent of the screen, is to block the passerbys on the highway.
Yeah, I guess what I was going to ask, in keeping with along your line of thought there, the city doesn't consider millings, old asphalt millings, to be a permanent pavement. That's considered to be in the same classification as gravel. Well, on their existing lot, which they're moving in and out of every day, they have, from what he said, there are areas that are the millings. So, I mean, my next question was going to be, is that a violation of UDC?
I don't know if that's what, I think that's what he said. I don't know if that's what he meant. But.
Anyway, if they're going to use that they can use that for the storage areas, yes. But I agree, we need the paved portion of it in the center. I mean, that's even consistent with the case we had a couple months ago out on Sipel Road with storage and paving around it and all that good stuff. So, anyway.
Okay, so having said that, is there anybody who would like to make a motion?
Can I clarify about the landscaping? So I'm fairly new on the commission. So I know in the proposal, it's saying 28 shrubs, correct?
Yep.
So would the owners have a choice of where they put those shrubs? Or is there some rules they have to go by? And then, as you mentioned, Wally, if this is then going to be evaluated later and they're, like, let's say a sidewalk now is going to have to be put in, are some of those shrubs then just going to be pulled back out?
So first of all, great questions. Landscaping needs to be placed on the private property, not in the public right-of-way, and that's typically where the sidewalk is located, is between the property line and the curb of the street. The question is whether or not a sidewalk's still going to be required. Understand, we haven't even got to the full site plan review process. They're kind of in this stage of what's going to be required, what's not going to be required. So as part of that site plan review process, we require a conceptual landscaping plan to be provided, and that shows us the location of the shrubs, trees, any other type of improvements, if they put fencing or anything like that, that typically would get submitted as part of the site plan process. We would review that and take a look at that. We typically leave the landscaping up in the air in certain situations. For instance, the trees, however they want to work, because a lot of times when they place those, they want to place them so they don't have impact of the traffic flow or whatever. We're not asking for trees to be planted here. That's kind of been a discussion that we've had. So the discussion about the landscaping, I know you guys have the ability to mitigate or provide any conditions you want as part of this approval. Sometimes when you look at it, where is the more highly trafficked areas or the areas where you're kind of buffer and provide a little more aesthetics and screening to the property. So you may have that a requirement to say it needs to be along this area or that area, but typically we leave it up to the landscape developer and the applicant, and then we go from there. So.
Thank you.
I would argue we don't need to get involved in where they place the shrubs.
Yeah, I just
That's their deal.
Yeah.
We do regulate how big they are and how many gallon potted
Yeah.
and then also, obviously depending on the time of year, we have moratoriums or we allow, can't put landscaping in right now if you wanted to, right? Sometimes there's paving moratoriums too. So really depends the time of year when the information comes through too. So, but we leave the variety up to them and we review those to make sure they're in compliance. So.
Thank you,
I have
Wally.
a question for Wally, kind of following up on that. So the 28 shrubs could be part of the required screening if we do require screening?
That would be the.
No.
So there's a minimum requirement for landscaping, and then there's a screening requirement. So we
they're
don't allow them to be double dip to count them both
All right.
for that. Now, sometimes depending on how it's designed and laid out, they use that in addition to the additional screening requirements that are being provided. So, I mean, we've seen screening from various things, from just a fence with the plastic slats inside of them to a fence that's broken up by landscaping to berms that have shrubs planted on top of to ornamental decorative, fencing to, I mean, there's many different operations, arborvitae and, pine type, coniferous type trees that get planted. So there's a lot of different options that are available. A lot of times it's confined to the space, right? So some things take up a little bit more space. If you put like a evergreen tree, obviously it's going to grow. It's going to have a greater drip line for that. It can consume a little bit more area. But that's why we leave it up to the applicant to provide that screen or that discussion to us so we can see if it meets the intent of the code. And then they have the ability to see does that work best for them, for their site. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, guys? Anybody like to entertain a motion?
Can I interject for one quick second?
Sure.
Just to get clarification of what you guys are going to be making a motion on. I think if you have that diagram brought up. So my understanding is, based on your discussion, if you go back to that image.
Sorry.
With that rectangular area outside of the lined areas would be, you guys discussed requiring pavement for that area, correct?
That's kind of the.
That's in
jumping
alignment with
off
the code,
point, yeah.
yes.
Okay, I mean, there's just get clarification so everyone understands. The property line or the line on the right-hand side that goes up and down, not requiring fencing, screening, or anything along that portion because that flows into their existing lot. That gated access that we're talking about,
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
correct? Right? So that you're looking to waive and not have that requirement.
Yeah, Wally, I'm suggesting there's no need for gated access off of 11th or 12th Street.
Right.
The access to the
So-
yard is, so that would be contingent upon the site review plan as well as,
So when we look at access to a site, we don't only just look from a street, but from the interior space of the thing. So currently, right now, you'd have to screen the entire yard. So that portion I just talked about normally would require a screen
Yeah.
for that. And that gated access we're talking about is that access onto that property. It is visible from the public right of way and some other areas. So my understanding was just there would be no requirement along that because in my understanding, that makes sense just
Yeah.
because of it flows into their existing property, which we can't require them to pave at this time or do any of the improvements based on the way our code is written. But they have the discussion to waive that requirement. So
Agreed.
is that what you guys?
That's kind of what I understood.
It's just, these are things that we just need to hash out if you guys are gonna look at doing that, just so we know when we move forward for that, so. And then the discussion would be to allow asphalt millings where they're storing or parking the trailer areas, is that right?
I think that's already allowed.
Okay? All right,
So in essence, really what we just need is a motion to waive the gated access, the fence gated access is really about the only thing we're really,
In the trees.
and modify the landscaping plan. Modify the landscaping requirements to 28 shrubs in lieu of trees.
okay, so then basically,
Hang
we
on.
still have the paved the circulation area, the
would still be
parking of
required,
the
yeah.
storage of the trailers will be on the asphalt milling area. There'd still be requirement for the screening around the yard area, and then the placement of 28 shrubs with the waiver of the trees, is that correct?
Yes, we're waiving gated entry entirely. We're waiving screening and fencing on the east property boundary. That's it.
And modify landscape.
Well,
We're not changing the trees, we're just
Modifying it to
Modifying
take
it,
the
yeah,
trees
to
out
substitute
and add shrubs.
shrubs in lieu of trees.
yep.
Okay.
Okay. Entertain a motion from anybody?
I can take a stab at the motion.
Okay.
I guess I'd make a motion to waive the fence gated access requirement along the existing site or the east side of the property, and to modify the landscape requirements to not require trees in lieu of 28 shrubs.
28 shrubs total, I'm sorry. Or 28, okay.
Correct, yeah, that number you guys came up with.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Travis, you can take roll.
Carl?
Aye.
Russell?
Aye.
Norton?
Aye.
Leffelholtz? Christ?
Aye.
And Mulligan.
Aye.
Motion approved.
Okay, thank you. All right, our second item on the agenda is a preliminary plat for Hales Mill Road, north of Derby Grange. Is our applicant in the room this evening? Come on up. Good evening.
My name is Dave Schneider, Schneider Land Surveying, 906 First Street North, Farley, Iowa. Basically working with Greg Adams and the group of individuals that he's working with to develop this property that he purchased from Ron and Jocelyn Briner. This is the Phase 2. We were in here this past summer with the first quarter of this project. They wanted to get some lots kind of put together so that they could start working on homes over the late fall and into winter on Phase 1, which has been constructed. Pretty much everything's in place, including the wells. The road is constructed, the grading obviously done. The infiltration cells are installed, but the media is not in that in those yet because of the erosion coming off the construction of the new homes, but basically acting as silt ponds. Anyway, we're looking at doing phase 2 here. This is again within the Dubuque, in Dubuque County, within the 2-mile jurisdiction of the city limits, and that's why we're here. It's the border of this property is closer to the Dubuque corporate limits than it is to Asbury, so we're obviously looking for your review and approval. There's 25 lots in the continuation of this project. Hoping to start construction mid-spring, whenever the conditions get right to start integrating and drainage and prepping for the streets and utilities. Very consistent with the Dubuque County subdivision requirements and the typical developments in the county where we construct these access drives on the ridges, 1 acre lots to meet the septic requirement, with the realization that if this thing ever does get annexed, there's probably going to be city sewer and city water out there at some point. As we go through the final plat, we'll be working with engineering to make sure we give them all the required easements they need for those utilities. I guess we'll be working through the initial phase of it, or there was private wells for 5 to 6 lots. On the initial phase, it'll be consistent on this, and we work through the County Board of Health on that. The stormwater on this property will be reviewed and approved by the Dubuque County Conservation Group, Eric Schmeckel and that office. We've already submitted kind of a preliminary concept drawing. We illustrate them on the preliminary plat where our detention will happen. As we go through the final, which you'll have submitted through you again with the final construction drawings, we'll have the actual final calculations and stuff submitted on that. So, yeah, I guess if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Mr. Snyder.
thank you.
Any questions for the applicant? Okay, very good. Sheena?
Certainly. Thank you. Sheena Moon, Associate Planner. The applicant did a great job of summarizing the project, so I will just hit on a few brief points here. As he mentioned, the property is located within the 2-mile extraterritorial jurisdiction of the city. That is why it is here before you for review. This is phase 2 of a larger subdivision. As you can see in the image before you here, this would create 25 new residential lots with communal wells, individual septic systems, and would also create 2 private streets, Keegan Court and Ellie Rose Court. With this proposed plat, the entire residential lots in the area or in this subdivision would be 33. There would be 2 agricultural lots, which are at the lower portion of the image there. And then there would also be approximately 18 acres of the subdivision that would remain as wooded hillside. The lots are compliant with the city's standards for lot area as well as street frontage. And the proposed plat is in substantial compliance with the city subdivision regulations. And with that, we're available to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you, Sheena. Any questions? I think it's pretty straightforward.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the preliminary plat for Country View Estates, Plat 2, at East Hales Mill Road, north of Derby Grange Road, Lot 10 in Country View Estates.
Very
Second.
good. We have a motion and a second. Travis, if you would take roll.
Zucaro,
Aye.
Norton,
Aye.
Russell,
Aye.
Waffleholz, Christ,
Aye.
Morgan.
Aye. Thank you. All right, with that, we're going to move on to our 3 public hearing items. Our first one is a rezoning request.
So I'm sorry to cut you off, Mr. Chair. This will actually go on to the city
Oh, thank
council
you.
at the January 18th meeting for the preliminary plat.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you, Wally.
which is the Tuesday following Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Yep.
Thank you, Wally.
Write that down. You said the 18th, Wally?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. We'll move on to the rezoning here for the property at 2571 JFK. So we'll ask that the applicant would come up. The way this will work is the applicant will make their request to the commission, and then when I open it to the public, if there's anybody here representing neighbors, I'll ask you to come forth at that time. So is there applicant here?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to accuse myself from this and the next public hearing.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Good evening, I'm Terry Huseman, owner and founder of Huseman Electric LLC here in town. I recently just purchased this property earlier spring, late spring, summer. It is currently zoned as office residential. What I'm looking to do is get that C3 designation so that we could continue running out of it as a contractor shop. That being said, this shop doesn't really have, I guess, personnel there the majority of the day. So what we're looking to do is just get it so we can keep doing our operations, mainly just storing vehicles and stuff like that. That's the main intent of what we're trying to do right now.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant? I'm sorry, the intent is to store vehicles?
No, just to operate as an electrical contractor.
Okay.
So as I'm understood now, the list of businesses that are allowed to be there an electrical contractor doesn't fall under the OR current zoning designation that I have right now.
Okay,
So I just wanted to move into compliance with that part of it.
okay, sounds good. Thank you. All right, you can have a seat, and we'll open it up for public input at that point. So if you'll come up and state your name, state your address, and what you have to say.
Yeah, good evening. My name's Tom Stovall. My wife Linda and I live at 3345 Tibby Court, which is the property immediately to the west of this property. And we would like to offer our objection to rezoning the property due to the fact that it's just not a good fit for this neighborhood. We've talked to our other neighbors who unfortunately couldn't be here this evening, but would also object to it. And, this is, if you look at this photo, this property is surrounded by single-family residential units. And again, it's just not a good fit in this neighborhood to put in this kind of a use. And basically, as we understand it, the applicant looks to put a parking lot in the back on the west side of the property. And basically what that does is puts a parking lot in our backyard, several of us. And aesthetically, it's not good for the quiet, peaceful neighborhood we're all accustomed to. Secondly, we all have a real concern for stormwater runoff if there's a parking lot back there. Our area back there is kind of like a bowl, and in the past we have had some serious water issues from runoff up the hill from the JFK area down to our area. And in fact, in our home, we've been required to put in 3 sump pumps in order to mitigate stormwater runoff. So that's a real problem we see with this. We put together a letter, which I think you have all received, where we tried to outline some of these things. But again, it just doesn't fit there in a residential neighborhood. And the use in the past of this property has been, although it's been commercial, it's been very light. Most recently, it was a hair salon. And before that, I think it was a garden shop many, many years ago. And the field or lawn on the west end of it is, in the 26 years we've lived there, has just been a field of grass, which as we look off of our deck, we enjoy seeing from our backyard. So those are our concerns about the rezoning of this property, and we hope you will consider those as you deliberate. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Anybody else from the public that would like to speak up? Nobody on the phone, right, Sheena?
No.
Okay.
Nope, no comments.
Okay, with that, we'll close the public input. Any rebuttal by the applicant? I'm sorry, where did you go? There you are.
Just like to take a couple of minutes here to address a couple of those points that were brought up. First off, the term parking lot is incorrect. That's not what I'm looking to do. This property comes with a small office area up front, but then a very large garage that's attached to it. But there's currently no way to get inside of that structure with a vehicle. I own this property there and the property to the north. So what my proposal was just to make a driveway simply around that upper building right there that would curl around into the back of the large building with the white roof there. Excuse me. That's the main goal. I'm working with Beasing Development on water runoff, everything that's being requested by the city I'm doing as well. So there would be a full privacy fence that would be put up, 100% blocking any obstructions or like that. And again, the intent is not to store materials or anything like that. It's just a way that I can drive into the back of my building. It's really the only goal that I'm looking for. So I can do that with as little pavement as possible. I just, a 12-foot drive to get behind there and then enough to turn and get inside. As there would be a garage door cut in the back of that structure right there.
Terry, can I ask a question? So the concern, I understand the neighbor's concern, and I appreciate that, as I'm sure you do too. Is there an opportunity to enter that building from the north side in lieu of the west face? You're going to be adding a door regardless, right?
With the way that the building is constructed, the highest point of that peak runs east to west on that building. So that wouldn't give me the required height I need on that north side, I believe, to get in there. So that's where I wanted to come in right there. There'd be a small retaining wall that would just bring it up and curl around before the property ended, staying well within my lines and just kind of flattening that out there and put a privacy fence up and cutting a garage door right in the center of that structure right there.
So I guess what I'm getting at here is, when I look at this drawing, can you pull that up, Sheena?
Mm-hmm.
And Terry, talk me through it. I mean, the concern, if I'm the neighbor behind, is there's going to be vehicles back there. There's going to be stuff at some point in time. So, or there's the opportunity. So if we make this change to C3 and stuff comes up and you need to park things back there, we would have just given you the green light somewhat inadvertently because that's what we're trying to avoid here. So if there was a drive that got you to that door in the back, if that site plan review, or if that site plan rather, included simply a 12-foot drive, or I think that's what you said, right?
Correct.
To get back there that gets you into your point. Because one thing I would highlight to the neighbors as well is you do have a water runoff issue. If you've had water in the house, you have a problem whether he does something or not. And so this is one way to attempt to alleviate some of that, is we can try to accomplish some stormwater management there that can solve some of the issues you currently have.
And I would have all the professionals in to help with that.
Sure,
assistance
understood.
as well.
So what is your perception there, or your opinion rather, of narrowing the drive that accesses the, because I hope you can understand, going to if we make the change to a C3 under these terms, you could sell that property tomorrow, and then that puts the neighbors in a very precarious situation. Is your intent is pure, I believe,
Yeah, I understand.
and the next owners may not be in that same vein, right? So what would be your perspective on a narrower drive path to get in there? Because I could understand how the concern is there's going to be things parked back there.
Sure. I'm not opposed to having it narrower. I just think 12 foot's kind of the standard of what a driveway usually is. So that's just the number that we chose for that.
Well, you're 12 along the side there, right?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
correct.
Because you're 30 foot deep on the back end there, right?
Yeah.
Plus or minus?
That doesn't even need to be that big up there. But what I would like is right there on the southerlymost part is a little bit more room there. I could curl a vehicle, into the back of that structure right there. But there is that part, right where straight across from like the building line up above, all that could be reduced even yet still.
Terry, I know
Just,
you're, I'm sorry to cut you off. I know your engineer is in the room, or is he?
No,
Oh, he's not, okay.
no.
Just your firm, Pat? I know, but just your firm was working on it? Okay.
We've talked.
Okay.
We're just waiting
Understood.
until after the
Okay,
holidays here.
understood. Okay. Any other questions for the applicant?
Chairperson Mulligan, just a quick question. So when we look at driving perpendicular into like a building or a parking stall, typically the drive aisle width is 24 foot wide for like a 19-foot parking stall. So if you're thinking about like a dimension for maneuverability coming in and out of a location, 24 foot is typically the minimum if you think of a parking lot to turn and swing into a perpendicular parking stall. So if you're talking about reducing a paving in that area, that's kind of the minimum. But that's for a standard vehicle. I'm not sure. I think most of the vehicles that Mr. Huesman uses are
Yeah, just
Are they
like a
vans,
standard
like vans?
utility van, like
Yeah,
a service
so-
van.
So just to kind of give you guys an idea of dimension-wise. So, but I think Sheena's got a good staff report, so, sorry.
Thanks, Wally. That's great.
Anything else?
No, sir, not at this time.
Okay, thank
Thank
you. Shayna, is this you?
Sure, yes, it
Okay,
is.
thank
Yep.
you.
Sheena Moon, Associate Planner. Thank you. So I'll just kind of run through the general overview of this project again. As the applicant articulated, this is actually two parcels that are part of this property. The two lots together, as you see outlined in the image here, make up approximately 6.8 acres of property. The northern site is developed with a storage building, and as they articulated also, the southern one is almost like an office building out front with additional storage type structure on the rear side. This building is currently, or these two properties rather, are currently zoned OR, which is office residential. And just to highlight a little bit of what the neighboring zones are, across John F. Kennedy Road, we have R1 properties. The property directly to the south of these two lots is also an R1 property. The properties along the west side are R1. To the north, we have OR, which is, again, office residential. There is an office, a general office use here. And then to the south, there's an interesting situation where there's a pocket of C1C that accommodates a landscaping business as we understand it. So that's a general overview of what other zones are in the area. As the applicant mentioned, they are looking to rezone to C3, which is a general commercial, to accommodate their contractor shop, specifically electrician contractor shop. I'm going to run through some of these slides quickly. As we mentioned, this is a very conceptual plan, but I think obviously it's already helped articulate a little bit of what the applicant's trying to accomplish on the property. Important to note, they've also identified areas in which they would plan to do a privacy fence, as well as a retaining wall. Obviously, these would be dependent upon where the drive aisle, and if approved, where that would end up landing. And the water flow on here is a little bit misleading. This obviously is an engineered drawing, so we would take a look at that in a little more depth at a later date if this were to move forward. A few photos of the site. If anyone has driven by or as the neighbors know, there has been, this is a Google image I should articulate, I'll get further down here. There has been some soil moving already on the property. That's actually kind of how the applicant came back to us. It was a zoning enforcement matter that came up. Mr. Huesman was great. He showed up and has started working with the city almost immediately to try to remedy the matter. And so in the images here, you'll see that some of that grading has already taken place on site. I'll just kind of, this is from the northeast side of the property looking to the southwest. And I'll kind of scroll through these quickly. Again, along the north side, coming down, the blue building here to the left is the structure in which he's seeking to provide access from the rear. Again, a lot of dirt moved here. It's been kind of leveled out, looking towards the rear of that structure. And then kind of looking towards the north. And also an image here just to kind of articulate the grade change between this site and the neighboring properties owned by Tom and Linda. With that, the owner, as I mentioned, is looking to rezone to C3. The C3 zoning does allow for an abundant number of uses beyond what the OR zoning does. So the office residential allows for 18. The standard C3 zoning allows for up to 55 uses by right, or permitted uses rather. Staff has reviewed that list. We've kind of gone through and struck a number of uses in the C3 that we felt would perhaps not be appropriate, and made that recommendation to the commission for your consideration should you decide to move forward. We've also included a couple of conditions for the commission's consideration, specifically pertaining to the outdoor storage and restricting the outdoor storage of goods, materials, merchandise, and trash, obviously. We've included a screening requirement as a condition that would be a requirement based on the site plan review requirements. And I should take a step back and mention that this property would be required still to go through a site plan review. So that would include review with engineering, planning, transportation, stormwater specifically. And I know Mr. Huesman has started some of those conversations with stormwater to get an understanding of what's required for him. Tom and Linda were nice enough to join us this evening. As you are aware, they have submitted a letter for your consideration in opposition to the project. You should all have a copy of that on the dais, and it was emailed to you prior to today's meeting. Staff has not received any other feedback or input for neighboring properties outside of the neighbors at Tibby Court. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission may have.
Thank you, Sheena. Any questions for staff? All right, we'll open it up for conversation amongst the commission.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to say, part of our charge is to see that if the rezoning would require us to rezone it if there was an error in zoning originally. And I think with what's in the neighborhood and stuff, the C3 isn't a good fit for this property, and I won't be able to support it.
Okay. I would like to, so if we review the list of C3 permitted uses, the vast majority has been struck. So what is remaining, and I'll just touch on them briefly. So a beauty shop, which it was, an artist studio, a business service, contractor shop or yard, which we're discussing, upholstery repair. I would propose we strike number 26, which is laundry. A medical office building, number 30, I would also propose we strike, which is mortuary. And a variety of other indoor related businesses. A thought I have related to this is the C3, although it does allow a lot, this commission would be either one, not going forward with it, or two, considering limiting the use quite substantially, as well as limiting the ability to store outside, and also require screening. The other thing I want to highlight is the fact that there's already a drainage issue in the back that's affecting neighboring properties. So I would consider that the opportunity to rezone it, I'll say appropriately, and what I mean is striking some of those from it and allowing uses such as the applicants, again, under the premise that there's no storage outside, which I understand. That's the big issue is we don't want to be looking at stuff or trucks or things of that nature. Any other thoughts, comments?
I agree with that assessment.
I would suggest striking private clubs also, if you're striking uses.
So just to clarify, as far as striking, you had mentioned number 26, which is the laundry, dry cleaner, laundromat, number 30, mortuary and funeral homes, number 39, which is the private club. Did you also mention medical office? I apologize.
No, I did
Okay,
not.
just making
Nope,
sure I had that
nope.
clear.
Yeah, what
thank you.
I'm proposing, as Rich had added on to, were those three. Sheena?
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other thoughts? Anybody like to make a motion? I'm happy to do it.
I move we recommend rezoning 2571 John F. Kennedy Road from OR residential to C3 to allow electrical contractor shop with conditions.
Can I amend that just a touch? So specifically, doggone it, you guys, I lost my page. Ay, caramba. Sorry.
I would amend it to say with the conditions outlined in the memorandum of agreement as amended by our discussion.
Okay.
Holy smokes, this is a book, Sheena.
I'm long-winded, what can I say?
Okay, here we go. Well, so specifically excluding, so that the items noted within your recommendation, also to include the exclusion, that was an oxymoron, also to exclude item number 26, 30, and 39, so laundry, mortuary, private club, and it will also very specifically exclude, how did you read that?
Mr. Chair, I think the way Mr. Russell phrased his amended motion by accepting the memorandum agreement and striking the uses as discussed would cover what we need
Successful there,
for.
Wally?
And then, so just to kind of understand a little more, a memorandum agreement, when we have conditional rezonings, require the signature of the property owner. So Mr. Huseman will have to agree to these conditions. Those have to be agreed to prior to going to city council. He'll sign this document, it'll go on to city council, and they will go through the public hearing again through this process with those amended conditions, as you guys indicated, striking those 4 additional uses.
Are you also adding no outdoor storage for it also?
That's in the memorandum.
Yeah, that was in there, yeah. So I apologize.
The other two items.
I also just want to make mention of the discussion earlier regarding the drive aisle width and whether or not there was any interest to include any condition particularly for that item.
I don't want to get, personally, I don't want to get involved in that and allow the site review process to handle that, as well as the appropriate stormwater management. So whatever that leads to.
Yeah, whatever the fire department wants probably is
Sure.
going to be the driver.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sheena, that's clear as mud. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Before we take roll, Sheena, can you please clarify what we think we're,
Motioning?
yeah, please. Just so
Okay.
the whole commission is,
Really putting me on the
and the
spot here.
applicant as well. I want the
I
applicant to
can
know.
Travis
grab it
is
too.
Travis is taking minutes, so he'll be able to.
I could have.
That's on a motion to approve with the conditions outlined in the memorandum of agreement and with the amendments during the discussion, including the staff discussion, or conditions, as well as striking 26, 30, and 39.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you'd please take roll with that.
Oh, sorry. Leffel-Holz. Russell?
Aye.
DeCaro?
Aye.
Norton's Mulligan, Christ, sorry.
No.
And Mulligan?
Aye.
Okay, motion approved 4-1. This will be heard at the,
January 18th.
or not approved, but
January
recommend
18th,
approval
yeah.
for the January 18th council meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Travis. Thank you. Thank you for coming in. Okay, we'll move on to the fourth item of our agenda. The rezoning quasi-judicial of the northwest corner of the Southwest Arterial and Tamarack Drive. Is our applicant in the room this evening?
That would be me.
Thought it was.
I have a PowerPoint presentation I'm going to pull up just to go through briefly,
Do I have to?
if we get the technology to work for
I'm
us.
sorry, I didn't realize I needed to do this. I've never had to do this on this. Sorry, Wally, it's asking me to sign in, and I'm just not sure if that's. Oh, sorry, thank you. On the spot here. Oh, the moment of truth, everyone. Oh, of course.
This is the life we live now, right?
I got it, we're okay.
Two-factor authentication is a good thing for,
Okay,
we're in.
I'm sorry about that. I didn't realize I needed to do that. I should have checked. Walk through a 20-minute registration. All set. And we're done. Oh my gosh, it wants to give me all the notices here. I'm sorry, Wally. All right. I'll let you manage that however you'd like to. It should be good. Sorry for the delay there.
Just for clarification, Brittany, are you still with us? Okay, I just want to make sure we didn't drop you from the go to meeting because a lot of things got closed out there. So, okay. All right. So the request before you tonight is to rezone the property, and I'll provide up a diagram here for you. There we go.
It's one slide ahead.
Yeah, this thing's a little bit goofy. So let me just start over again. So basically tonight, what I'm going to speak to you is we're going to talk about rezoning the property from agriculture. The city recently annexed into our community from agricultural to PI, planned industrial, to accommodate an industrial park. Tonight, I'm going to go through the location of the property, where what's going to be rezoned, briefly annexation history, the rezoning process, development processes, our conceptual development plan that gets approved or attached to the ordinance, discussion on, traffic study issues, property access to the site, and then just some opportunities for questions at the end. So as I mentioned before, this is the former River City development property, the area outlined in red. The city did go through an annexation process to acquire this property back in November. The subject property is comprised of 5 parcels totaling approximately 156 acres. And then that additional land that is required to be brought in with this rezoning is to the center line of the adjoining right-of-ways for the Southwest Arterial and to the property on Highway 151-61 to the south. As we go through this development, the area that you see on this map before you, the green is the property that was annexed is being proposed to be rezoned. The area shaded in blue was right-of-way the city had to bring in as part of the annexation to make the connectivity to our corporate limits. Our corporate limits is the area that's outlined in the dashed red line that you see before you. That did go before a public hearing at the City Council on November 1st. And that information was submitted to the Secretary of State's office, and upon their acknowledgement of receiving the resolution, the map and everything, which we have received back from them, it is officially in our corporate limits. So this property is now part of the City of Dubuque. The City of Dubuque did go through a process to acquire it, and they have closed on the property, so we are the owner of the subject property. So just to kind of briefly go through some of the discussion points that we get involved with, with the rezoning process. Typically we're going to receive an application, And then the big thing about when we get involved with developments or rezonings in general, we always ask the applicants to have public meetings ahead of time before they come before this board, to be able to have discussions, to maybe hash out some concerns, to inform the public about the request before that. In this case, the city of Dubuque is the applicant. And as part of a rezoning process, we're required to send notices to all property owners within 200 feet of the property to be rezoned. So, for this process, what we did is we actually had an informational meeting with the neighbors. The city of Dubuque sent notices to those neighbors that are all within 200 feet. Those are the ones statutorily we're required to notify. The Greater Dubuque Development Corporation helped assist us. They actually took our notice and provided that to additional property owners that may be impacted by the development, primarily expanding that to additional business owners in the Tamarack Business Park, and then also several other neighbors that are in the immediate location on top of Military Road that access the site through the Katy Cove residential development site. So we attempted to have a meeting on December 15th, 2021. I like to have in-person meetings as an option, as an opportunity to provide it to all neighbors, and then also provides an opportunity for side conversations to happen. Unfortunately, that was the date of the windstorm. So we had to cancel that meeting. So with that, we moved to a virtual format, and it was a good thing that we did that because on December 28th, that's when the snowstorm came through. So ideally, sometimes virtual meetings work well, sometimes they don't work well. But in this case, we were hit with Mother Nature twice, and the virtual meeting we held on the 28th. We had several property owners attend that meeting. Virtually, there was a lot of questions that were being asked, and I'll talk about some of those opportunities. There's some questions that they had. Some are present here to be able to speak to you as part of the public hearing. So when we talk about industrial development, the city of Dubuque currently has, 4 major industrial parks. We also technically have a 5th one. These are Cooper Boulevard Industrial Park. It's the older industrial park located down on Cooper Boulevard along our riverfront development. Our Dubuque Industrial Center, which is the portion that is basically from Radford Road, between Radford Road and the Northwest Arterial and Chavanel. That roadway is currently being reconstructed, or it is reconstructed for access through that. And then the portion from Radford Road all the way out to Sipel Road, on the other side of Sipel Road, is Dubuque Industrial Center West. We also have a newer industrial park called the Dubuque Industrial Center South that is developed off of Sipel Road, just north of Highway 20. That came through there, and a lot of times people kind of view the technology park as you come into our community from the south on Highway 151 as an industrial park. That's more of an office park development, not so much of an industrial type thing, but a lot of people will still kind of classify that as an industrial park. So over the years, we have gone through these different processes, and when I talk about different development, if you're familiar with our community, you look at industrial park development on Cooper Boulevard was developed with older zoning regulations, older site development requirements, and then you compare like Dubuque Industrial Center West. There is a stark contrast between those with additional landscaping areas, open space. There are some public amenities that are associated with our industrial development. So when we get a subdivision request that comes through us, this actually goes through 2 processes through our development review team. And our development review team is comprised of the Planning Services Department, which is our office, the Engineering Department, the Building Services, which is actually called the Construction and Inspections Division, that was recently renamed when it was absorbed into the Housing and Community Development Department, and then our Fire Department and Water Department. So we have a standing meeting, we meet regularly, but all these are brought through those boards, through that process, in order to be reviewed through our code requirements to make sure that the development is meeting certain requirements, of which I'll go over here briefly. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but we get involved with site development requirements and landscaping area requirements, and a lot of things when we talk about impacts to adjoining properties. Lighting is a big discussion. We do have lighting requirements and how those cutoff luminaires and foot candles at property lines. Stormwater management is also another big issue that gets handled at not only the larger subdivision development from a regional detention standpoint, but then also when we get down to the actual individual sites as they're developed. So several other requirements that we go through, but that is a process that when you come into the city of Dubuque and we have to go through it, we take it through our development review routine process to make sure that we're in code compliance with that. It also provides a mechanism if something is not in code compliance, that we go out and we our office enforce the site plan provision requirements to ensure that they're being in compliance for that. So included here, attached here is the conceptual development plan. So, when we talk about a conceptual development plan, it's not an actual final development plan. It's in conceptual nature of how the area will be developed. This conceptual development plan was provided to the neighbors on the back of their notice, and then we had that informational meeting, like I mentioned before, which we pulled up this information. We were able to have a conversation, a discussion as the site's being laid out. So what you see here before you, kind of outlined in different colors. The red outline is a phase 1 of the development. There is a blue outline, which is phase 2, and there's a phase 3 layout for that. It kind of shows large pad development. For grading, also street layout as it goes to the site, and how the sanitary sewer and water is going to be provided to the development. Talking about access roads and just in general locations and discussions. If you can see, I think you can see the cursor up there, can't you? Oh, can't see the cursor. No, you can't. So there is a roadway. You can see that roadway. Military Road is the road that snakes up in the upper corner that goes from north to south. There is a road that comes in and kind of snakes around and goes along that purple edge of the phase 3. That roadway is Katy Cove. It's a private residential street. It's 22 foot in width and pavement. It's built to county residential street standard requirements, which adjoins part of the property. There is a smaller stub street that comes off of Katy Cove that comes up in that little indentation portion. As you can see on the map there, on the round of the bend of that Katy Cove development we're talking about, that does provide access into this development. That is actually put up in the covenants and the requirements that established this whole entire property that was provided before that. So in general, this is the large-scale pad development. Now we are in the process of hiring an engineer firm, consulting firm, to take this conceptual plan and kind of move it further into more of a definitive site development site development plan for that. And as we go through that, the big things that we talked about specifically when we're looking at consultants is we need to have conversations with the neighbors, where it's an industrial development, it's butting up against a residential area. So we want to be good neighbors, and it was the best way we can look at maybe mitigating some potential impacts to the adjoining properties. A lot of those potential impacts do get addressed typically just through our development review team process with our requirements for site plan requirements, stormwater control. I did meet with some of the neighbors out there with current erosion issues that typically would be addressed, obviously, through not only the subdivision grading and how we're going to handle water coming off the site, but then also individual site plan requirements there. That we have requirements for stormwater management tools above and beyond what's required for the regional facility. So as we look at that and the development of the site, several of these pads are actually located 50 to 60 feet below the grade of Katy Cove. As you go out to that site, this property sits high on the hill and it drops down to that intersection of the Southwest Arterial and Highway 151-61. The primary access to the development right now is going to be coming off of East Tamarack Road, which is located along the south edge there to the right. You can see there is an access point that comes into there. And then as we work with the engineer to come a little bit more final site development plans, the access to Katy Cove will be evaluated to determine, if it's necessary, is it a requirement for a secondary access, or does it even need to be an access there at all? So that will be defined a little bit more detailed when we go through more final site development plans. As we work through this, though, with the industrial ordinance to rezone it to a PUD, a conceptual plan needs to be part of that. Now, before you have a very detailed ordinance that lists out all the bulk regulations, the requirements for lighting, stormwater, screening requirements, several other requirements that are a little bit above and beyond sometimes our site plan review, but we put that in an ordinance because a PUD allows us that flexibility to be very flexible with the design standards. Sometimes you'll have a site plan review and they don't go to the level of details, but a PUD does allow us that flexibility. We do have the ability to place other conditions in that PUD ordinance that would be followed, or the conceptual development plan. Now, as we move forward with this, if the engineering firm that works there and decides, hey, you know, this layout is not going to work, we did work with a local engineering firm to develop this conceptual plan, and engineering department and other departments have reviewed it, consider the layout to be very conceptual for what we would need. If there would be significant changes to this plan, that would require them to come back before the Zoning Advisory Commission and City Council if it's approved. Any development that gets approved would have to be in substantial compliance with the conceptual development plan and the ordinance. If it's not, that requires them to go back through a rezoning process. In the past, we've had some amendments to some of our districts, but typically, most of the time, that doesn't happen with regards to amending the conceptual development plan. A lot of times, you know, lots may be laid out a little bit different. They may be designed to be larger platted lots, and they get subdivided in smaller lots, and then maybe an additional roadway may be placed in, and those are major changes that we would typically require to come back before the commission and city council. So one concern that we've heard from the neighbors is traffic, obviously. So the city of Dubuque, as part of that RFP to hire that engineering consultant, we have a traffic study requirement in there where they'll be consulting and determining with our engineering department the level or the extent of that traffic study. That study will be primarily focused on the interchange of the Tamarack Drive and the Southwest Arterial. The analysis be with, for instance, some assumptions of traffic coming from the site, the development, and how that intersection will be required to be modified, whether there need to be some improvements for maybe a roundabout or a signalized intersection, or maybe not a requirement. But that's what a traffic study goes through, and that information will be provided by the city, and then we'll provide that to the Iowa DOT. The city doesn't have jurisdiction over this intersection. It is under the jurisdiction of the Iowa Department of Transportation. So once we provide that information, we will work with the Iowa DOT to look at if there's possibilities for them to help us make improvements, or whatever they feel that would be necessary to make improvements to that intersection. There were some other discussions about looking at maybe a traffic study for Military Road and for Katy Cove. Currently, right now, that wasn't a detailed plan, but that's something we can definitely discuss with the engineer as we work forward through it. Right now, currently, the primary access will be coming off of Tamarack Drive, but there is a potential that there could be access come off of Katy Cove, but till we do a little bit more further analysis and we get a little more of the detail of that, there will be issues with topography and some other things, but secondary emergency access may be a concern as well. So this is also one of the first times that we actually have a county residential roadway private as access into a development. It's not very common. This is the first one that I'm aware of with the city, but as the city has grown, we'll probably continue to impact these things as they come before the city council, before the Zoning Advisory Commission and City Council for development. As I mentioned, you know, property access, those areas located in circle down below, primary access coming off of Tamarack Drive. I highlighted that upper smaller circle, that's that current existing access road that is stubbed into the property. But there is frontage along the property where additional access may or may not be taken from. So just to kind of outline that, and that'll be more refined as we go through and get more detailed analysis. Once again, if you look at the topography change there, in order to get these large buildable sites, there's going to be a lot of cut and fill going on. So there is significant topography changes from the Katy Cove site as you drop down to some of the building pads. So a lot of things we look at also is, you know, is this in compliance with our comprehensive plan? So, you know, when we go through that and do that analysis, let me get to my section of my staff report here. So, I mean, anytime we look at development or improvements that are made in our community or rezonings or whatnot, let me try to get back to that. There we go. We look at compliance with our comprehensive plan. And as we look at through the comprehensive plan, some of our goals and recommendations that have been identified in that plan is also attracting large employment centers with access to infrastructure facilities to ensure such development does not disproportionately impact residential areas. So that's where we're talking about. And those opportunities meet with the neighbors, listen to their concerns as we develop through this and we continue to have those conversations. This area is a large area that is going to be developed in industrial. Our future land use map has identified a portion of the property to be industrial. And then also it is located at 2 major corridors. So it's whether it's going to be developed as industrial or commercial. As you can see, Tamarack Business Park has already been there for several years. It's been identified as an industrial area, and the county future land use map kind of shows that area being expanded for that industrial park as well. So additional criteria that allow for appropriate expansion of existing industrial parks as identified in the future land use map. Explore additional industrial development opportunities near the Dubuque Regional Airport, particularly the US Highway 61 corridor, which this is part of. Expansion within and adjacent to existing industrial development is anticipated, like we talked about. You know, once again, talking about those new industrial locations along major roadways, just like this location that we're talking about. But then we also want to encourage mixed-use developments, creating vibrant environments where residents can live, work, and play within walking and biking distance of their home and their opportunity sites throughout their community. So when we look at the Dubuque Industrial Center West, we do have residential that is very close proximity. We have Commerce Park, which is several apartment complexes, and then you have Westbrook subdivision, single-family residential home development that's all within those areas. So as we work through this, the major site plan requirements and look at the design of those, there'll be opportunities where we'll continue to reach out to the neighbors as we look through with the potential to rezone this property from ag to planned industrial. That's all I have, unless you guys have any questions at this time.
Thank you, Wally. Any questions from the commission? So Wally, just for clarity, so there's 2 potential access points on the Katy Cove that you're looking at. And tell me again, that road it's a county road or it's a private road?
It's a private county residential designed road. It's not a public road. It's not maintained by the county. It is maintained by the homeowner association. When the city purchased this property, we actually became part of the homeowner association because of how it was tied and the legal description tied to the property for that.
So what's the risk to the homeowners association for that increased access?
I'm sorry, what was that before?
What is the risk to the HOA for the increased use on that road on Katy Cove?
So as we go through and we look at evaluating if there will be access through there, obviously access for a residential street for just normal traffic is different than if you're driving heavy vehicles or trucks over it. So as we go through and that engineering consultant works with them, if there is evaluation and say there had to be improvements to it, that would be discussed at that time. Okay. But as we get a little bit more further information along that way, you know, we're still evaluating, are we going to use it? Are we not going to use it? Are we going to use it for emergency access? So those are options that are out there. Until we get more of the final design development stage of that, we'll have a better answer for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Wally, would there be any consideration for accessing Silverwood or Stonewood Drive instead of Katy Cove?
For the extension, so that would, for the private development to the south is what you're saying, that's owned by Tamarack Business Park? Mm-hmm. So there could be potentials. Obviously, as you look at that development, those roadways are kind of just stubbed. As you can see, if you look at the lay of the land of the development, you could definitely see how the roadway network could be extended and an access could be provided. That would all have to be discussed as we go through the development, but we don't control that. That is a separate property owner. Right. So those conversations may would have to be involved with them in order to get that approval for that connectivity.
Okay.
We don't have site control or access for that, but there is definitely a conversation. We do look at trying to get that nice connectivity throughout our subdivisions. Not to have one access into, because if there are situations where, say, a tree blocks a roadway or vehicles on fire, something, our emergency services need to have the ability to get into an area where it's blocked. So when we do look at development, we always look at it as a second means of access. And sometimes that second means of access can just be a simple gated access that's only controlled by the city, emergency access, that has a Knox box situation on it, where if there was a call and say that would be blocked, that say the ambulance or the fire truck or whatever would have to get through there, and they can't get through there would be an opportunity to come through a secondary access. Once again, that hasn't been finalized yet. That will be more through the analysis and as the site moves forward with more of the final design elements to the plan, so.
Okay, thank you, Wally. Okay, with that, we'll open it up for, I'm sorry, did you have something, Rich?
I guess I will follow up on that. Are you aware of any time where that's happened? Where they've actually had to use the secondary access?
Yeah, so we have several sites located through our community that have secondary emergency access. One site will be, if you think of Medical Associates site on the Northwest Arterial.
Have they ever had to use it?
I'm not sure. I haven't had the conversation with the fire and emergency department about how often they use that access.
Yeah, that's my question.
It's extremely rare, unique situation. Understand that they have a primary route that they need to go to the site, but we always have to have that opportunity if there is a situation that we need to have a secondary access. We had a long discussion. I think some of you members might have been here, but we had the Mount Carmel site. That's prominently featured on the front of the Telegraph Herald today as part of the building permits that we've been reviewing. But there was a lot of discussion about a secondary access that had to come off of a street that goes through that site. And the question was, how often is it going to be used? We would be required to maintain that and plow that to ensure that if there is a call for service, that we have the ability to get through that. We are working through another subdivision in close proximity to this area, Silver Oak subdivision, where we're discussing a secondary access into them off Elmwood Drive, which also exits onto the Southwest Arterial on the opposite side of the roadway here. So there are many other situations where we have that located throughout our community. I can go on, but I think that's, it's not uncommon, but how often they use, it's that situation case by case if there's an opportunity, or not, I shouldn't say an opportunity, a situation where the roadway would be blocked that they'd have to take that secondary.
Yeah, I'm just curious about how much effort we put into these, and then I'm not aware of any of them ever being used for anything.
Right. And we always have to plan for the future and for the emergency, because if there is a situation that gets blocked and we can't get there, that's, our role and responsibility with the city is to provide those emergency services. So when you come into the city, that is a service that you receive, fire protection services, the police protection, all those that we come through there. So we have to ensure that we're providing those services to our business owners and our residents. So when we look at analysis of these plans, we always look at secondary access and how we're going to get to a site if there's a call for service. So, and believe it or not, most of the calls for service it's more ambulance than,
Sure.
fire. But when you call, we bring everyone. So,
Okay, so with that, we'll open the floor to the public. So what I'll ask is if you're to speak in favor or not, come on up, share your name, share your address, and your thoughts.
Good evening. My name is Jay Wurzberger. I live at 9762 Katy Cove. I'm against it. Phase one, it's hard to be against it. It's in the middle of nowhere. I take objection with phase two and phase three being zoned industrial. They are way too close to the neighborhood. The easement you guys are looking at for Katy Cove is horrible. 50 to 75% of the houses on that road have a variance, which bring them closer to the road. There's banks on either side of it. It's windy. There is no way there should be an easement allowed. Second of all, if an easement is allowed, it'll be a shortcut to the arterial from Military Road. Going back, to the west, where he says the grade drops on phase three, 50 to 60 feet, the road is already dropped. There's a bank there. The road is already about 20 feet above grade. So another 50 or 60 feet is pretty detrimental. It don't make sense. Are you putting guardrails in? What? I don't understand that. Something else is I share a property line with them. I own 36 acres. The property line jumps in and out of a very significant ditch. How do we maintain that erosion when the line keeps jumping back and forth? And then another thing is industrial. Industrial runs third shift. They're noisy, tons of light. Who knows what smell you're gonna get? Who here would like that in the backyard? That's why I'm saying phase one, there's no arguments. Phase two and phase three, when people built there, it was zoned residential. We knew there was a possibility of development, but housing, not industrial. And then,
Anything else?
what if it was a private investor? Would it be such a slam dunk? It just kind of seems like it's city, it's gonna happen, take it or leave it. If it was a private investor, would they have to get these answers before zoning is approved? That's all I got. And like I said, you showed pictures of other industrial parks. Where was the houses? Who wants this in their backyard? Noise at night, lights, and God knows what else. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you, Jay. Anybody else?
I'm Jack McCullough. I'm representing the Tamarack Business Park Property Owners Association. We very much oppose this development or rezoning of this development. Our major concerns are the traffic it will cause. The intersection at Southwest Arterial and Tamarack Drive is already a very dangerous intersection. And the added traffic from an industrial site, especially with truck traffic in particular, is really going to make this a much more dangerous intersection. Stoplights are not the answer, because starting and stopping trucks, and especially the intersection in particular, was never designed properly in the first place. You're sending trucks north to go south, and they're stopped. The traffic builds up behind it. You got to look quickly and then chase yourself across the intersection real quick in order to get across safely. I go through it every day, so I know. I've seen 2 accidents myself within 3 weeks apart. One was on October 15th. The other one was on November 5th. We had already approached the city council. We have a letter here from everyone within our park signed. I also have a letter from the subdivision, Silver Oak subdivision, which is across the way, which also is affected by this intersection. Now, you say you're going to do a traffic study, okay, but that doesn't guarantee they're going to solve the problem. So if you rezone it and you go ahead, it still doesn't mean it's going to solve it. And basically, I don't know if you need a copy of this letter or not, but the people that couldn't be here tonight gave me their letter too from the Silver Oak subdivision. So it's basically a public safety concern more than anything.
Thank you, Jack.
So our suggestion is hold off on rezoning until you solve the problem at the intersection. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jack, I think we would like copies of the letter for
If you want to give it to Sheena.
our minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Good evening. I'm Dennis Yeager with Mulgrew Oil and Propane. We're at 10314 Silverwood Drive out there. Reiterate what Jack said, we're all for pro-development. Our main concern is that intersection. The majority of our traffic is tractor and trailer and tank wagons hauling propane, fuel, and lubricants. I mean, if there's going to be a traffic study and communication, I would recommend you talk to a lot of our haulers that are coming in and out of there, not just like us as a company, we got our own drivers, but the haulers that are bringing in the propane, and these are 9,000 gallon propane bullets, they're bringing them into our facility, as well as the fuel haulers. I think they would have a good perspective of what they deal with as a safety concern on a daily basis at that intersection. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Anybody else? Okay. We'll close the public session at this point. Turn it back to Wally. Any rebuttal to what you just heard?
Yeah, sure. So as we go through this process and we talk about the development, we will be talking to the neighbors. The traffic study, initially when the Southwest Arterial was being designed, there was a proposed roundabout at this intersection of East Tamarack Drive and the Southwest Arterial. As it went through that and the analysis and everything came through that, the DOT determined that the roundabout was struck from the design of the proposal. As we go through that traffic study and that analysis is coming into place, I've heard Mr. McCullough indicated, the stop and go traffic, the traffic flow as it goes through the site. Ideally, as we look at that, but then also the suggestion of, when they do that traffic study analysis and, they do reach out to the current business owners to have some conversations, but the suggestions primarily about the delivery system where it gets to your site, where you do the distribution from that, is a great suggestion. I'm not as familiar with those traffic studies. Our engineering department handles those specifically. They're the experts. We have a transportation engineer on staff that works with a team of about 4 individuals from the engineering department as we look at those analysis for that. As we go through the process and rezone it, we have to have the proper rezone before we move forward for that, for the potential to understand that, we're looking at having a contract signed for an engineer for a substantial amount of money to do development of the site. We would like to have the assurance that we're going to at least be able to conduct an industrial park at this location before you provide a significant amount of taxpayers' money in with all of that development of that site. For that, we do. I have had conversations with Mr. Wurtzberger. He is the gentleman that spoke before us, Jay, located at the end of Katy Cove. We talked about discussions with erosion as it goes down through the valley. As with creeks, they meander, they go back and forth. That's kind of the jumping that we're talking about back and forth. The other thing that was discussed at the meeting that Mr. Wurtzberger brought up and some of the other residents brought up was privacy. And so we have screening requirements, whether that's a requirement for they can place a fence or screen along those lines. Distance sometimes provides that. Well, that's the additional discussion that we can have as we have an engineer on staff or hired as a consultant to sit down and talk with them to look at how we can mitigate and have a better impact or to limit the impact from the industrial park from the residential neighborhoods that are directly adjacent to it. The way this area is developed with the Southwest Arterial location and Highway 150, 161 being a major corridor, all these areas as you go up and down the Southwest Arterial are going to be looking at commercial or industrial type development. So all those interchanges from where we start out at Sipel Road and Highway 20 to where the Southwest Arterial starts to all those other interchanges where we have the accesses that come off to North Cascade Road and to English Mill Road access points. So those are all areas. Now, what is interesting, there is no access to Military Road from the Southwest Arterial, and that is concern that I brought up is that we don't want to have a thoroughfare that takes a de facto off ramp that's taking it from Military Road down to the Southwest Arterial. So that's something that we've definitely taken advisement. We don't want to push and focus heavy numbers and traffic counts through county residential developed streets. So all those factors come into play as we go through the design of elements of the of the development. That's all I have unless you guys have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Wally. Any questions for Wally?
Wally, I do have a question.
No,
So,
it's not practical, but I would like hard answers before zoning is approved. Once zoning is approved, it is what it is. I would like to know about easements and other things. That's our greatest concern. There's just too many maybes and possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you.
okay, this might help to answer. If this is rezoned tonight, it's just the preliminary part of it. Because it is a planned district, industrial district, it would come back to us at the commission before anything is approved for it, right?
So this will go to city council. If you guys, so first of all, you make a recommendation
Right.
to approve or deny.
Right.
It goes to city council. If the city council approves, the ordinance will go into effect, and this will be the conceptual development plan. Knowing that there's going to be more detailed plans that come out of this as we go through the site development, and if there's major modifications or changes to that plan, that will definitely come back before the commission and city council for significant or a substantial deviation from the conceptual development plan. So when we go through our site development process, the DRT and for subdivision review and site plan review, those design standards are in place to help look at mitigating certain impacts, lighting, stormwater is a big issue. So all that is controlled through our Unified Development Code currently. So that a lot of those concerns will handle through the site development process. You just heard a case tonight specifically on JFK Road, right, where we have individuals looking at putting some paving at the rear of their property. And there's opportunities where, and I have a tendency to agree with Mr. Mulligan on there to alleviate some of the stormwater issues because they have access to a site plan review process. Currently, right now, the property is agricultural. It's been row crop agricultural, and there's a higher runoff for the water that comes off that site. We have to take that through a stormwater review process and everything for that. The question that most of the neighbors had was Katy Cove, and are you driving through our neighborhood? And how's that access going to look? So that is something we're definitely going to look at and try to address. Like I said, it is not an ideal situation to have a county privately owned access road provide access to a development.
I guess my question was more like, when we've had like, say, Clark, University of Dubuque or something, when they've made a change and stuff, it always comes back to us if it's, so I'm wondering, since this is a planned industrial, will it come back to us?
Yeah, if they do an amendment to the ID district, yes. So just like, so University of Dubuque, if they added a building or something substantial from that, that would come back to you. Now in Dubuque Industrial Center West or Dubuque Industrial Center South, if they're building a building on there and it's in compliance with the conceptual development plan, that doesn't come back before you. If there is a roadway change or significant grade change or impacts where access is coming from, we would have to take it back through the process to come back before the Zoning Advisory Commission and the City Council. So.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Any questions, commissioners? So I would suggest that the fact that the City of Dubuque is the initiator of this is a positive in comparison to a private investor. I do agree that your private investor would have a little bit of a different hurdle in front of them. I would also propose that a private investor may not necessarily have, your concerns may not be at the utmost importance to them. So I would take comfort in the fact knowing that we do have the city that has heard your concerns and that clearly there's, as Wally had mentioned, there's a very thorough and detailed plan that does need to be followed. As a matter of fact, the plan we have in front of us is simply schematic in nature. And so there does need to be a lot more investigative work that does need to occur. I do agree on Katy Cove. The grade change is significant right now and will be even more significant in the future. And so clearly that's something that's not going to have the potential to quote unquote slip through the cracks as that is what we as a city have established are the parameters to play within as it relates to those factors. And I would also say that the traffic scenario will shed a lot of light on a lot of this. And so, you know, I take comfort in knowing that the steps in front of us are going to be taken in a very thoughtful way by the city based on what Wally has laid out. And I say that in comparison to what maybe your private investor those steps they may have to take. So I do want to share those thoughts as it relates to that. But having said that, I would entertain a motion from the commissioners.
I make a motion, we recommend approval of the rezoning from ag to PUD planned industrial for the properties described in the legal description on page 2 of the application.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Thank you, Brittany. Travis, we have a motion and a second. Would you take roll, please?
Zucaro?
Aye.
Leffelholtz? Russell?
Aye.
Christ?
Aye.
Mulligan?
Aye.
Approval will go before January 18th City Council.
Thank you, Travis, and thank you for coming in. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the last item on our agenda here. We have a text amendment, amending the Unified Development Code. Wally, is that you speaking in regards to that?
Travis.
That's Travis. Okay, Travis, if you'd hang on just a second, we've got Commissioner Norton joining us. Okay.
Assistant Planner Travis Robeljan. So this memo transmits an application and ordinance for text amendment to the UDC to allow commercial greenhouses as a permitted use in the C2, C2A, C3, C4, and CS districts, as well as altering the off-street parking requirements. The objective is to allow additional opportunities to locate commercial greenhouses throughout the city. Additionally, the city's comprehensive plan, Imagine Dubuque 2037, encourages locally grown foods, expanding opportunities for limited commercial opportunities within neighborhoods, and increasing the potential for adaptive reuse of existing buildings. Text amendments are intended for wholesale changes as a means for to the zoning code, as a means for the city to respond to changing conditions and emerging trends in the community. Text amendments are not property specific. There has been interest expressed recently by citizens regarding commercial greenhouse uses such as microgreens, aquaponics, hydroponics, as well as relocating just a standard greenhouse. Currently, the commercial greenhouses are defined in the city code as a building or premises used for growing plants, preparation of floral arrangements, cold storage of flowers, or dry storage of materials, used for agricultural or horticultural purposes, including sale on and off premises, which means it can operate as a retail as well as wholesale. Currently, the UDC only allows commercial greenhouses in the C1 district, and it is further limited by subsection 510.8 within that district to be established within existing structures, among other limiting standards. So as a code effectively removes the ability to relocate or locate within the city, staff determined that it was appropriate for a text amendment. Again, it's to permit it in a C2, C2A, C3, C4, and CS district citywide. The applicants for these would still have to go through site plan development. They would need to meet all the site design standards such as parking, screening, anything you think of in that regard. And then in addition to the use being permitted, we're also changing the off-street parking requirements table. And we would be changing that to the more strict of the two between retail and wholesale. And that would be 1 per employee on a max shift, plus 1 per service vehicle, plus 1 per square foot of gross floor area accessible to the public. And additionally, it's already listed in the off-street table, and we would strike it from that location. So in an effort to allow additional opportunities for commercial greenhouses throughout the city, planning staff recommends the UDC be amended as a permitted use, with commercial greenhouses as a permitted use in C2, C2A, C3, C4, CS districts, and to amend the minimum off-street parking requirements. If you have any questions, we are available.
Travis, any questions? Travis, I presume this has come up in the past.
Excuse me?
I presume this issue has come up in the past. That's why we're talking about
It
it.
has, and more recently, more often, so. It's,
Yeah. Okay, so with that, we'll open the floor for any public input. Just share your name and your address.
My name is Corinne Schreiber. I live at 2815 Jackson Street in Dubuque. Representing myself and my husband to speak in favor of the text amendment that would allow commercial greenhouses to be permitted in the zoned areas listed. As renters of a property at 2418 Central Avenue, we've actually run into this as a barrier with the current C2 zoning permissible uses that's preventing us from growing and raising produce at that location, including lettuce, spinach, microgreens, and mushrooms. At this location, because of the limitations in the zoning. So this property is currently Zone C2, and upon review with planning services, this zoning doesn't allow for the indoor growth of those listed items, which inhibits our ability to grow a business and education space that we've been developing and expanding on for 3 years now. By allowing this text amendment, you would allow my husband and I, as Re-Evolution Farms, to create this indoor grow space, which will allow for the expansion of our current grow efforts, which are all soil-based in an urban agriculture area within the city limits. Would allow us to create an indoor processing space for the plants coming off that farm. This change in zoning will also allow others more flexibility to develop sustainable indoor grow operations within the city of Dubuque, and thus support the city of Dubuque's mission of sustainability. By allowing for the development of our grow space in the city of Dubuque, you'll gain another small local business that's rehabbing a Central Avenue building that's been vacant. And due to the nature of this growing greenhouse business, cleanliness, sanitary conditions are an absolute must. So that will allow for the improvement cosmetically and structurally of the building. And if our efforts set a precedent for others, then it's possible more buildings within these listed zoning areas could become the home to indoor grow spaces or processing facilities that would support an increase in production of local foods, which is desperately needed. This text amendment will allow for the expansion of educational opportunities as well through these indoor year-round grow spaces for local students. We have and continue to work with Holy Family to facilitate a summer agricultural course. But with having this indoor grow space, we would actually be able to extend that opportunity year-round to local students. This would also give us the ability to invite and partner with Dubuque Community Schools and other local colleges which have shown interest, but currently our ability is limited to the shorter growing season. So I'd encourage you to consider allowing this change, which will benefit both our business and the city of Dubuque's sustainability efforts, and continue to show other communities how Dubuque is planning for the future.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing nobody else, we'll close the public session. Travis, anything to add to that?
No, not really. Re-Evolution Farmstead is a prime example of an opportunity within the city. There are others. Even traditional greenhouses would now be able to relocate or locate in the city.
Yeah. I'm assuming I can skip the staff report, right? You gave it.
That was it, yes.
That sounded really good, Travis. Thank you.
I only need one panic attack a day.
All right. Any questions, concerns, or if not, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to amend the Unified Development Code to allow commercial greenhouses as permitted in C2, C2A, C3, C4, and CS zoning districts and modify related parking requirements.
I will second that.
Great. We have a motion and a second. Please take roll.
Zakaro?
Aye.
Russell?
Aye.
Norton?
Aye.
Ruffleholtz?
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
Mulligan?
Aye. Motion passes. Great.
This will go before the zoning, or the city council at their January 18th meeting for the text amendment,
Great.
public hearing.
Thank you. All right. Seeing that there's nobody in the public, I'll assume there's nothing from the public. Any items from commission to discuss? Any items from staff?
No items from staff.
I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. Thank you all.
Thank you for letting me do video or telephone. I appreciate it.
Brittany.
Thank you.